Disclaimer. This is going to be my first and last video series about any religion. The reason for that is that research is quite large, which makes it a gigantic time investment to even get a grasp on this topic. To give you an idea, for this video I have read 7 books as a main source. You can see the books here on the screen, as well as the following books which you can again see on the screen. And many more works that were not relevant enough for this video. As you can imagine, it takes a lot of time. Disclaimer 2. I will pick the following as an example to prevent certain arguments. I know that a lot of ex-Muslims are resentful of the religion due to their experiences, which are quite often then not connected with abuse. However, that's like my family getting bombed by the US and me using this as an argument why democracies are bad. As much as you can claim that you have seen the real Islam, as much I can claim that the religion I follow, understand and interpret is not what you have seen. I'm sorry for your experience, and I genuinely wish you a better, more fulfilling life, but what you have experienced is not an argument to what I will present here. In short, not everyone has to understand the religion the way you have experienced. Disclaimer 3. I know that some people have an obsession to trash talk this religion. Like on 9gag, everyone is in agreement that Muslims have to be genocided, which is really weird. So if you are from that scene, I'm not gonna say anything that's going to change your mind. You will waste your time with this series, since you're not gonna accept what I will say anyways. Disclaimer 4. Since this is a gigantic topic with a gigantic rabbit hole you can jump into for decades upon decades, I have to compensate somehow for the summary of the summary I have read that is in fact about the religion itself. As a result, I might show you, for example, this, while explaining to you what it is about without reading or giving you the information one-on-one. Example, you see this, and I tell you how the Prophet was asked if date trees should be crossed. The Prophet said no, a year later the harvest was bad, the dude went WTF, and the Prophet said, I'm here to preach the religion, for nothing more, nothing less. You know economic matters better than me. So if you're interested in the full story, just pause the video and read it. Likewise, there will be many cases where I talk about something that is on the screen without telling you everything, but you will get the idea. Long story short, I have to cut stuff out. If you're interested in my notes, check my Discord channel. So before I start this video and take you to a never-ending trip into the Quran, I would like to start with some historic matters to give you a rough idea what went on in the Islamic world. Reason for that is that it is commonly misjudged that Islam is the reason why the Middle East is in the situation it is today. Likewise, a lot of degeneracy is equally attributed to the religion itself and not to dictatorships, the colonial history, the Western abuse of Islamic nations, or the protection of violent Islamistic nations by the US. Of course, it's only the religion, not the lack of education. Anyway. You may or may not have heard about the Islamic Golden Age or perhaps the translation movement during the medieval ages, and usually European supremacists talk it down by claiming that all of it was just some copying of works from ancient Greeks and the subcontinent. This is obviously bullcrap, since the Islamic Caliphate at that time financed education to a degree that entire new disciplines were found. For instance, chemistry and algebra comes from this time. We're using Arabic numbers in the Western world because of the Arabs, and many innovations, additions and discoveries were done by Arabic-speaking scientists thanks to the gigantic investment by the Islamic Caliphate. One of the more famous examples is Avicenna from Central Asia, who wrote a medical encyclopedia that became standard reading in European universities for centuries to come. So the Islamic world was back in the medieval age centuries ahead of anything in the world. Specifically, the cultural, educational, philosophical and innovative centers of the Islamic world were in Sicily, Andalusia and Baghdad. This lasted for a couple of centuries and then shit hit the fan. So what happened? In Andalusia it was the Inquisition, in Sicily it was the Normans, in Baghdad, most important and painful, it was the Mongols. Specifically, the last event threw the Islamic world into utter shock. Prior to the Mongol invasion, the Muslim world believed that they would conquer the entire world and that they are destined to do so. After all, they absolutely trashed the Romans and wiped out the Persians. So a successful invasion by some horseboys from a backwater did not just destroy the pillar of the Islamic world, it made many people question why it happened. Long story short, the conclusion was that people had to take the Quran literally and not as a complete work within its historic context as it was taken. Born was the classical Islam. And just calling it classical Islam, there is no scholarly description of it, I'm just using it. Anyway, So we enter a period where the Quran is taken more literally. Of course, not everywhere at the same time, and there are of course exceptions, but slowly and surely the Islamic world transitioned into ignorance where everything is taken literally. The Islamic Enlightenment by Christopher de Belaik gives you an excellent insight on how the Islamic world was and how it transformed, and again, long story short, there is a gigantic progress within the Islamic world to the point that we can say that the Islamic Reformation is happening for the last 150 years. Javed Ahmed Ghamidi is one example and quite famous among Islamic scholars who is part of this post-classical era, where the Quran is looked upon as a complete work in which the historic context is taken into consideration and where judgment is done by rationalism. Again, I'm just calling it post-classical era because it makes stuff easier to explain. There is no scholarly description of it, I'm just using it. Anyways. But Sefa, you can't just randomly pick one scholar who talks outside the norm and claim that an entire reformation is happening. And you would be right if it was just him, but that's not the case. I would like to refer to Exordium to Coherence in Islam by Fatih Nizam al-Quran. There are dozens of scholars within the same school of thought as Javed Ahmed Ghamidi that are mentioned in this book. It goes back to Farahi, who was born in 1863. So this school of thought exists at least that much. But Sefa, you can't just mention some scholars from a specific region and claim that it was happening in the entire Islamic world. And again, you would be right if it was just that, but that's not the case. There are multiple scholars across the entire region that were calling out for reformations. Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, for example, was an advocate of democracy and argued that Western science and progress had to be incorporated into the Islamic world. There's also Al-Mullah Muhammad Hamdi Yazir, who was a maturity theologist and a highly respected member of Ottoman society. He was one of the few Islamic scholars that did justice to his profession. He knew multiple languages and was well versed in philosophy. We could also take the reformations done by Muhammad Ali Pasha or the Tanzimat era. And yes, they were influenced by Western ideas rather than call for Islamic Reformation. However, this Reformation is not solely fueled by Islamic scholars, but also the circumstances the Islamic world was and currently is in. Likewise, the religious freedom in Europe with the Westphalian order as their pillar was originally more politically motivated than religious, with direct religious consequences. Either way, a change is happening for the last 150 years, and either way, the post-classical era is not about reinventing Islam, but about rediscovering its original roots. So let's start with the very basic question. What is the Quran? Contrary to common misconception, the Quran is not a constitution. It's not filled with stories about what can or should be done, but a lot of stories about what happened. To be more specific, the Quran is about the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As such, the genre of the Quran is closer to Dante's Divine Comedy than to a law book. Sometimes it's addressed to the Ummah, all Muslims, sometimes to a specific group of people, and sometimes to individuals, which is why it's very important to understand the context of the surah. The Quran, at least according to Islamic understanding, also marks a transition from an age of prophets that were sent by God to inform the people about God's laws, and a post-prophetic era where everything is already said and that will end with the Day of Judgment. Logically, we're living in the post-prophetic era. Lastly, the Quran is not ordered chronologically, but according to the length of the surahs, meaning the longest is at the beginning, the shortest at the end. A chronological order does, however, exist. The Quran itself is divided into 7 chapters, which goes as followed. Each of these chapters have a chronology within themselves, meaning they are chronological within the chapter. Each chapter also has a theme. The themes go as followed. Lastly, the chronology between the chapters look like this. Chapter 2 is the climax, while chapter 7 can be seen as the beginning of the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now that we know what the Quran is, another question emerges. How am I even supposed to understand the Quran or the religion itself? After all, there's not only the Quran, but also Hadith, stories, Sunnah, prior Abrahamic works, and a magnitude of explanations. In order to understand the Quran, we have to first study the background situation and requisites in which a surah was revealed, otherwise we are bound to misunderstand and misinterpret the surah. Secondly, we have to determine who is spoken to and about who. Within a single verse, the narrative can change from the Prophet specifically speaking to a person to the entire Ummah and about a specific group of people or to specific people in general. Lastly, we also have to determine what is in the Quran a general reference and what is a specific reference. So the person interpreting the Quran must not only possess a vast knowledge, but also proper intellect. Most importantly, the Quran is not just a scale for objective morality in which good and bad is differentiated, it establishes facts and demands the following for a full interpretation. First, being aware of Islamic history, when did what happen, where, and under which circumstances. Second, importance has to be given to the Hadith, when was what said to who and in what context. Third, existing sources by scholars have to be studied and analyzed. Who wrote what, based on what is legitimate and what isn't. But if everything is clear, why are there different schools of the Islamic belief in the first place? It's a bit of a rabbit hole within a rabbit hole, but basically the earliest Muslim authorities were under the opinion that the Sunnah, and with it analyzing the Quran and the religion itself, should be scholarly duty and nothing the public should concern itself with. Given the circumstances and the massive amount of education and money it would require to make everyone equal to a scholar, this is understandable, but it resulted in people following different Islamic scholars and with it different Islamic views. It doesn't help either that in many places in the Quran, words are used in a general sense while a specific context is mentioned. As an example, Christians and Jews are generally mentioned in the Quran, but more often than not, specific tribes following mentioned religions are referred to. Yet this does not give anyone any right to gatekeep people in what is right and wrong according to Islam. The Quran, for instance, says, your task is to admonish. You're not responsible for their supervision. However, this changes when we speak about authorities in general. Now that we know what the Quran is and how it's supposed to be understood, there are 3 topics left to cover before we can transition to the next big part. Surah, Sunnah, Hadith. First, Surah. Surah is a chapter in the Quran and consists of verses. I don't want to go too much into the basics, but there are 3 things I would like to mention about surahs. First, each surah has a theme which its contents revolves around, making it into a unified whole, as chapters are supposed to be. Second, each surah contains introduction and a conclusion. Third, verses with introduction and conclusion may be divided into paragraphs. These paragraphs and sections, quote, relate to each other, not through the verse to verse, but through various literacy devices like parables, comparisons, or parallelism, as well as through statements and passages which are conditional, parenthetical, inferential, modifying cyclic, or which signify corollarious conclusions, questions, or answers, end quote. Secondly, Sunnah. Sunnah are traditions and practices which are not mandatory. However, there are also some guidelines in what can be Sunnah and what cannot. First, only things can be Sunnah that can be classified as being part of the religion by its nature and status, meaning the Prophet traveled with camels, but traveling around with camels is not part of the religion, so it cannot be Sunnah. Second, Sunnah relates to practical affairs in life, belief, ideology, history, occasions of revelations, and other similar things are outside of this sphere that can be Sunnah. Third, if things are initiated in the Quran but are still within the practical affairs in life, then they cannot be Sunnah either, meaning the Prophet, for instance, amputated the hands of thieves, flogged criminals for adultery, fought with people. However, all of these acts cannot be termed Sunnah. Note, flogging criminals is mentioned here, so what Indonesia is doing has little to do with Islam. Fourth, there are 4 more points to this, including aspects of human nature not being Sunnah, unless specifically made so by the Prophet, but this is the most essential part in order for you to understand what Sunnah is. And lastly, Hadith. Hadiths are records of words, oral Islamic law you could say. Some of them are not entirely accurate, meaning some of them are taken out of context, which is why it's very important to know how to understand and interpret Hadith. In order to interpret a Hadith, we have to ask/do the following. First, can the Hadith be attributed to the Prophet? Can this attribution contain flaws and mistakes? Second, does the Hadith go in any way or shape against the Quran? If yes, the Hadith is not valid. Third, Hadith have a standard of writing. Is this standard of writing upheld? Fourth, a Hadith must be interpreted within the frame of the Quran. Fifth, what are the references of the Hadith? Sixth, are there any variation texts of a Hadith? If so, they also have to be studied. Seventh, does reason and revelation contradict? Because reason and revelation cannot contradict. Lastly, and a small addition to the topic of Hadith, a Hadith is just an explanation of the religion itself, which is confined in the Quran. A fresh research into Hadith was done by Nasr al-Albani in 1999, where he researched into most books of Hadith and tried to sift out the rightly ascribed narratives from the weak ones. A research was done prior as well, but this is one of the more significant ones in the last decades, maybe even centuries, especially considering the scale. Now there's obviously much more to tell, explain and talk about, but I don't want to suffocate people with every minor detail. Family, for instance, obviously plays a big role, and there are specific gender roles within the religion, as in there is an idea of who should do what in a family, nothing that is forced, but I will refer to my notes and with it to the books. I'm not going to cover it here. If interested, again, check my notes. There are, however, some bigger topics I'm sure people are interested in, which I want to cover. It will help understanding and interpreting the religion much better. The topic people are surely interested in, and the topics I have to lose some words about are as followed: Sharia/Islamic government, jihad, the general philosophy of the religion, slaves, rights of women/polygamy, Islam and Christians and Jews as well as other religions, Islam equal Arabic culture. In no particular order.